Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Kennefick, and on behalf of Listowel Writers Week, Irish Fest Milwaukee, and the Pigott Poetry Prize, I'm delighted to introduce to you the poet Miriam Gamble. Miriam Gamble grew up in Belfast, and she won an Eric Gregory Award in 2007, followed by an Ireland Chair of Poetry Bursary Award in 2010. Her pamphlet, This Man's Town, was published by Tall Lighthouse in 2007, and she has subsequently published 3 poetry collections with the publisher Bloodact Books. And her third collection, What Planet, is the winner of the 2020 Pigott Poetry Prize in association with Listowel Writers Week. This is Ireland's largest prize for a poetry collection, and it is sponsored very generously by the Pigott family, and we're extremely grateful to Mark Pigott and the family for their continued support and celebration of Irish poetry, and particularly in collection form. Miriam, welcome to our virtual salon event. And we're absolutely delighted to be speaking to you. And huge congratulations on winning the Pigott Poetry Prize this year. How did you find out about your win? And I suppose more especially, what might a win like this mean for you and your collection and maybe your journey moving forwards?
Sure. Well, I found out. So I found out I was on the shortlist by email, which itself was really exciting because I've never. I have won a couple of prizes before, but I've never actually made a shortlist, and there's something very thrilling about shortlists. So I was really pleased, even just to be shortlisted, and really uplifting for me to win it.
I think that's why it's such a valuable prize as well, because it isn't just for the first collection, that you know it really respects and values that you're a poet with a body of work behind you now. And I suppose that's something I'm really interested about talking with you, because the books, obviously there's similarities between them, and there's thematic similarities, and certainly you can see that journey taking place. But I'm just really interested in how you construct or compile, if you like, or collate the books. Did the pamphlet, was that very different to obviously the collections, which are much more significant bodies of work in terms of size? Are you always thinking thematically, or does it come together organically, or did each book have its own little or big individual journey, I suppose, towards completion?
This is asking quite a lot of my memory, which I'll do my best to answer it. I mean, I think I'm kind of interested, you know, there seems to be a shift now where people, or many more people are writing books of poems, you know, so that the book is a concept, and there are certain things kind of decided or in place at the start that define what it's going to be, which is not the way that I've written any of the books that I've written so far. I write poems, and then at a certain point I look at those poems and I see whether I feel like I have a book, and then I try to, you know, make the best book in terms of the best shape out of the poems that are going to be going into it. So I don't know that they've had like radically different journeys, the 3 books. This one was sort of took me by surprise, actually, as kind of being a book, because the process of writing it was quite different. I think previously, or at an earlier point, I'd been much more of a regular kind of writing all the time kind of a person, and this one felt, you know, the stuff sort of swept in gusts and then cleared off again for months at a time, and so I felt that I didn't really have I actually felt like I had no idea what I was doing, which has probably been the case with every single book, but you forget, you know, and it feels like the stuff, once it's formed into a book, stuff from the past feels much more like it was always coherent, which of course it wasn't. But with this one in particular, you know, I felt really quite at sea with the work that I was doing, and many of the poems are quite strange, you know, and I didn't really know where they came from, and then when I can't even remember why, you just get a feeling like, you know, maybe now is the time to look and see. And when I did look at them, they just sort of presented themselves much more insistently, actually, as a book than maybe had previously been the case. So after that, it's just a matter of kind of trying to arrange them, which I find really, really difficult. Actually, it's sort of a murderous undertaking and really frustrating. And
Yeah.
you do get the sense that you could have, which is really odd, like a completely different book from the same poems, depending, you know, on how you arrange them.
And then you have readers, you know, who don't necessarily start at the beginning and go to the end, which I really do,
yeah.
because I'm so aware of how much it takes for somebody to put them in a particular order. But you can have such a different experience by reading them, you know, on a different day, depending on what order you choose to read them in. So it seems like a very organic process then, and that you allow a certain level of intuition and I suppose a gut feeling, I suppose, to guide you. And that kind of brings us, I suppose, to the title of the collection itself, What Planet, which I think is just such an arresting title, and it really made me think about it. What planet? And it opened up so many avenues, so many doors, because I was thinking, well, what planet is it? This planet? You know, it's a really clever and deep title. And I'm just wondering, did that come to you then early on, or you said that the poems were kind of insistent on becoming this collection? Is that when the kind of title came, or how do titles, I suppose, come about, particularly for collections for you, and I suppose particularly with this one?
So with this one, actually, the poem that the title comes from came reasonably. I mean, it wasn't like the last thing to go in or anything, but it was quite late on, and so prior to that, it had been called, or the working manuscript had been called, In the Annum, which is the name of. So there isn't a poem in the book called What Planet. It's just it's a quotation out of one of the poems. Whereas I had kind of titled it as I was going along after a particular poem of which I am fond. But I think, I mean, I always felt slightly uncomfortable with that because it only really spoke to one aspect of the book. So In the Annum is a poem that's set, kind of slightly phantasmagorical poem set sometime in the mid-90s in Belfast. And so there's quite a lot of stuff about memory in the book, and it speaks to that and to the surreal aspects of quite a lot of the work, but maybe not to everything that's going on in it. Whereas the title that I ended up giving it, the poem that it comes from, is based on a memory, but it's a kind of interlocking set of perspectives on the same thing, which seemed to me to kind of capture a number of the dynamics in the book, because I don't write a book that is a thing, you know. Then you're kind of in a position where you're trying to cover not cover a number of bases, I guess, with a title, but have a title that's expansive enough, you know, that it communicates with the sort of the range of key things that you feel are happening in the poems.
It's almost like a concertina effect, you know. You have to be able to bring it right in and pull it right out. I think that it's such a successful title in that regard. And your book opens as well with a quote from the American poet Claudia Rankine. If this is not the truth, it is also not a lie. And I just wondered, what was it about this quote that resonated with you and made you feel like this would be, you know, an epigraph for the collection as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think a similar thing with the title. It's I mean, one of the things that I really like about it is it's a quite bold statement, and also a really unresolved statement. So I quite like something for an epigraph that doesn't kind of put a lid on stuff or tie a bow around it, but kind of opens out onto it. And so, I mean, I think it resonates with the book's preoccupations. But I mean, it's scissored off of a longer thing where she's talking about memory. And memory, I think it's like, memory is a tough place. You used to live there. If this is not the truth, it is also not a lie. And so that again kind of communicates with all of the stuff to do with memory in the collection, but taken with that aspect of it taken away, it opens out into a kind of wider dialogue with the poems, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very appropriate, I suppose, given the first poem in the collection, which is a memory. And it also has, I love your titles. And The Landing Window is Unspeakable.
The really on-me title, that actually is.
I love unspeakable is just such a profound word. And for something, you know, the landing window is unspeakable. And it's a terrifying phrase. You know, it brought me back so instantly to things I found that were unspeakable when I was so young, that you could put that terror into words, or that creeping feeling of fear. And I just wonder then, maybe if you would read this poem for us, this opening poem, and then maybe speak a little bit about why you maybe chose it as your first poem, and maybe how it foreshadows or introduces more of the themes as you kind of touched on already. And I suppose how it echoes with the rest of the collection.
Sure.
Steve.
Find it. Okay. The landing window is unspeakable. There's a turn in the stairs beyond which, in the darkness, you are terrified to go. The realm of the creeping life which somehow carries on when everyone is out cold and unable to witness it. There's a mind-made barrier at the door of your parents' room. Their sleeping frightened you. The heavy breath, the still recumbent forms. You've been ferried back from light-drenched places, in coaches. The customary glare of the mint-green bathroom trebled in intensity, like it sucked in pigment while you were gone. Then woken foxed in the dimensions of the house you've lived your whole conscious life in. The recurrent dream of a cat walking a wall. A provisional touching your father's hair. So why did I choose it as the first poem in the book? Good question. It's probably somebody else would be better at telling me that than I'll be at telling you it. But I guess, I mean, the opening section of it, it's a sort of omen-laden little poem, I think. And the opening section of the book is quite ominous in a deliberately in a sort of variety of ways. I guess there are a couple of poems that just have like time kind of ceases to exist within them, and just sort of a variety of kind of threats and slightly apocalyptic feeling things going on in the early stages of it. And so I suppose it speaks to that. It's when I was thinking about it earlier on, and it there's a poem by Jacob Polly called Doll's House, I think, which has struck me that it kind of, one of the types of horror that frightens me the most is like Japanese horror films, like The Ring, or things that are set, or often what is happening within them is happening within spaces that are supposed to be the safest spaces that we have, like in particularly domestic environments, and that there's kind of just, there's something wrong in them, but you don't quite know what it is. It's like a sort of judder or a glitch, that is just unheimlich in a really frightening way. And so I suppose the Polly poem kind of has that in it. And one of the poets who was really important to me when I was writing this book as well, Thomas Tranströmer, has a super poem about a child who's sick, and there's a painting behind his head, and in the course of the poem figures start to move towards him in the painting, and nobody notices. It's these kinds of little glitches that nobody notices in the fabric of the real, or the fabric of the known and understood. So I feel as though it's that kind of, or it's my version of that kind of poem. So it is based on a couple of just literal facts out of my childhood. We did have a mint green bathroom suite, and we used to have a joke about it, when we came back from if we'd been on holiday, that it was like really lurid when we came into the house. And I did have, like, I guess there's two kinds of fear going on in it. One of them is a sort of inexplicable sort of deep psychological level fear, because I did have nightmares about cats walking along walls when I was a child. I mean, I love cats. What is frightening about a cat walking along a wall? But I was terrified by this. And then the other image at the end is a kind of a more real, like, human terror so I suppose it binds up things. Quite a lot of the work in the book, although unstatedly so, is set, or not all of it, or maybe not, but a proportion of it is set in my childhood in Northern Ireland, although the places are not specified necessarily and the times are not specified, because they're just sort of things pulled out, sort of little filmic moments in their own right, I suppose. But I don't know if that answers. I've wondered somewhat. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does give us. It's almost like it's not the right word, but almost like a trailer of like you're given. There's darkness and there's a flash, and there's darkness and a flash, and then you get more information about maybe the development of some of those fears later on as you go through the book.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
it's a mood setter, I guess. I mean, I think the way that I arranged this book, to come back to one of your earlier questions, was by mood, in a sort of almost like musical kind of a way, as against any sort of thematic organization, or I wanted it to move in certain ways. And you're right, readers come to books and I read from start to finish a poetry collection, but I also like to go back, I like to go back and make the connections that I see, not to have connections, dictated, or to feel as though I have to move in terms of the way I relate the poems, the way the poet has told me to do it by arranging it. But I do sort of generally read a collection from start to finish. But so you spend ages trying to create a mood, and then maybe somebody starts in the middle and kind of goes back. But
and it's so amazing, because I suppose then you offer, there's so many alternatives offered, because some people I know read the first and the middle and the last, and so they get a kind of overarching arc, I suppose. But that kind of, I suppose, relates to the structure, or maybe the form that your poems take. And you have quite a variety of prose poems and lyrics and concrete poetry and a sestina. And is that clearly something you're interested in doing? But I just wonder how that might happen for you when you're writing. Is it like collating the collection? Is it more organic, or do you specifically have a particular form in mind, or is it different for every poem? Again, that's probably a difficult question. But...
No, it's fine. I think my answer is probably slightly naff, which is like they tend to choose their own forms. That I very rarely sit down and go with the sestina, say, that's in the book. I didn't sit down and go, right, I have this subject matter and I think that would suit a sestina, so I'm going to write a sestina. I had an idea and I started, I think, wrote the first stanza of it, and it fell out in 6 lines. I may be misremembering this. Misremembering is one of the kind of core themes in the book, or the sort of distortions of memory anyway, so I'm conscious that it may be a sort of rose-tinted version of what happened, but I seem to remember that I wrote the first 6 lines and they had interesting words at the end of the lines, and I went, you want to do this then, do you? Okay. At which point, obviously, I then had to go online and get the order of the letters and write them all out, because you can't, it's too long and you can't remember what iteration they're meant to roll in and so on. But I mean, so it's not like there's no work involved in accepting the proposition from what the material gives you, like that you just write a sestina because it wants to be a sestina. It's hard to write a sestina, but I didn't, it kind of comes out of it, or whatever, whenever I arrive at a version or the start of something that feels as though it is going to be this is the form that it's going to take. It arises out of that rather than a predetermined decision on my part. I think there's only one poem in here, maybe the circle, like the concrete poem, the round poem, the time bowl. I might have, I can't remember if I decided at the start that I would make that bowl shaped, or because that's not really concrete poetry is a really big thing in Scotland, but really not a big thing in Ireland, I think, and not a big thing in terms of my the things that I would have, been thought to be drawn towards at earlier points. And it's not something that I imagine, doing a lot of. It just seemed to suit that piece. And there's a poem in it that has, called Cranefly, that has no agent, so there's no I, no you, no. which I did do on purpose just because I was sick of of the options, and I thought it would be interesting to try something that like didn't use any of them. Yeah, but that's the only thing that I can think of that's in there that had a decision made by me before it started.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting facing them, I suppose, on something very conscious, like, oh, I want to experiment and try something outside of the eyes or the U's, as you say, and then allowing the poem to kind of dictate it. So it's kind of a little bit of both, maybe. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm really interested as well in the collaboration that you had with the Welsh poet who's based in Ireland, actually, Nerys Williams. These two poems, The Canal at Fountain Bridge and Moths, how did they come about in terms of how did you work in the collaboration and how did they find their way into the collection? Was it by choice of design, or again, was it something that was quite organic for you?
The collaboration was brilliant. First of all, it was really fruitful for me, and I really missed Nerys whenever we finished, because I'd had a period where I hadn't really been writing much, and most of the poems, or I did 3 poems for the pamphlet and Nerys did 3 poems. So there'd been a previous collaboration done, so this was sponsored by the Irish Writers Centre in Dublin, and the previous one, the writers had actually co-written the whole text, and we spoke on the phone. We were sort of like, we didn't really want to do that, but we wrote poems that are in conversation with each other. And so really what happened was we talked about the kinds of terrain we might want to cover and the kinds of things we might not want to do, and then I would send something and she would send something back that in some way, and some kind of like squash ball way, kind of bounced off of it, or maybe like engaged with an image out of it. And so we really used each other as like inspiration, I suppose. And it was great. I loved doing it. And yeah, like I said, whenever it finished, because you have that, again, it's a proposition that comes to you, this is here, and you have to do something in response to it. And I found that really fruitful, and it didn't produce work that felt kind of programmatic or designed specifically or solely for this project or anything. I think both of us were, at the end of it, really proud of the things that we'd written and proud of the little like kind of combined thing that they came out in. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that she was going to want to make use of the poems that she wrote for it as well, and everything that I wrote for it went into this book. Quite naturally, it didn't feel as though they were kind of something else.
Yes. Oh, they're very much stitched in as part of the fabric of the book, very much. I'd love if you could read one for us.
Sure. I'll read the first one, which kind of was the first and the third poem in the collaboration at the same time, I think, because I wrote the first bit of it, and sent that to Nerys as a poem in its own right, with which I wasn't terribly satisfied, but it was a summer to start, and then she sent something back, and then the rest of it took off from there. So there may be a few things that I should say about this one. It's called The Canal at Fountain Bridge. It's really weird to be reading it, actually, because I have done it at readings a few times before, but in different locations, whereas it's about exactly where I live. So it's like about what's outside the window just now. So we live in an area of Edinburgh that is still under development, and kind of changing from, we're right beside the Canal, which used to be a kind of industrial area of the city and is now being kind of built up. And there's a school across the road that was being built for the first 18 months that we lived here. Loads of construction happened on our street as well, so the face of it was constantly changing for the first while, 2 years out of the 4 that we've been here, I guess. And so that's the kind of context for the detail of it, and it also plays a bit with not theories of memory really, but like practices related to memory. So the building of memory palaces, which I think were kind of in vogue, or the idea of them was in vogue during the Renaissance, but they date back to classical Greece and were like a tool for orators to remember their speeches. So they're really weird, you know, that like, and kind of, we'd never be able to do it now, like the exercise of memory that it requires. So they would kind of envisage a physical space like a house, and then they'd envisage rooms within the house, and then they'd envisage furniture within those rooms, and then they would take bits of the speeches that they put together mentally and put them on the bits of furniture in the rooms, and then when they came up to give the speech they would like take a mental tour around the house, and that's how they remembered what they had to say and what order it was supposed to happen in. So probably none of it's necessary, but that's all the kind of backdrop to this. So the canal at Fountain Bridge. The water doesn't flow one way or the other of its own imperative, but takes direction from the wind. It turns back on itself when it counters the lock, peppered moth cut loose from the product of industry. At night, the swans spin on the decks of its currents, and sieve, sleep, sieve, light bulk knocking the rim like bathtub toys. On a Sunday that reflects, by the classical process of association, your last summer as a girl, sun-bleached silences, the trekking business gone out of business without ever admitting as much. A man comes kilter to the grass and the newly dug beds by the stacked apartments, head down and on his knees, howling, digging. You watch him from behind the glass of a life going forwards, pretend that you haven't seen him. Men gather in a clutch. He takes the townwards path. Here is ecology. Here is the furtherance of education. Bright school climbing the sky. Its every out-facing surface a mirror. Here are the Spanish boys drumming up lonely salsas, a twirling glitter bowl, twigs rubbed in the night. Here is the scurf of the past, the clean scalp of the future. Here is a landscape like the head of an orator, meticulously shuffling through its show of slides. What is to be kept and what forgotten, and in what order. Here is health, affixed to the careful management of those weeping borders. And here, your own small past, abstracted from it in a box, others will smash and squeeze.
That was wonderful. Thank you. It's a fantastic poem. And it's just so wonderful that it came out of that, you know, conversation that you had with another poet, because I think sometimes we see poets as being so solitary, and actually
no, absolutely, you know, and I think I had collaborated with different types of artists before, painters. I'd never collaborated with another writer, and I'm always sort of up for things, you know. If somebody offers me to do something, I'm not very good at like having the initiative to propose something myself, but if somebody offers me to do something that I haven't done before, I'm kind of keen and interested. But I wasn't sure how it would work, because, you know, I am a sort of grump who sits in a room with earplugs, like kind of even if there's no one else in the flat going when I tried to write poems. I wasn't, but it was really a really sort of fruitful and enjoyable experience for me. Highly recommend it. Yeah, I mean, obviously they weren't written now, you know, the book's out a year, and it was, you know, apart from arrangement, finished, you know, a while before that. But I mean, I suppose they were written in the context of another kind of public, or a couple of other kind of public liminal spaces, some of which we're still in, you know, like Brexit was going on, or the sort of the run up to that, and then the crash of it. Presidential campaign was going on, and, you know, and then the extraordinary fact that actually that happened, which we're still with, you know, is so there was, I mean, it's partly a kind of like, what the hell is going on feel to some of the poems, I guess, you know, partly that's personal, and coming out of things, you know, that are personal to me, and experiences that are personal to me. So some of the stuff to do with perspective is related to personal stuff that I've had, like obsessive compulsive disorder, basically, in the way that it sort of screws with the way that you how you determine what is, you know, what can be trusted and what your brain is telling you, and what cannot be trusted in terms of what your brain is telling you. But I think we've all, in a public sense, just been kind of in a really weird place for the last few years, where we have people running around and someone says something and it's just not true because somebody else doesn't want it to be true. And so the whole question of what is true or false, or, you know, here or not here, is pertinent, I guess. You know, pertinent for me in a personal way, but also more widely in the process of the putting together of this book.
And that's why it's such an extraordinary book, and one that I encourage everyone to read, particularly in this moment, because it does, you know, allow us to interrogate, to use your word, and explore what planet that we're currently going to exist on. And it's a really beautiful book. And thank you so much for talking to us so generously and for reading so beautifully. And congratulations again on winning the 2020 Pigott Poetry Prize, Miriam Gamble. All the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for a great conversation.